Okay, hello everybody, and welcome to Writing with Sophie, Top 3 Takeaways. And today I am really excited because I have a longtime friend and colleague, Dr. Cynthia Miecznikowski, who is an associate professor of writing and rhetoric at the University of North Carolina, Pembroke. And she and I met over 25 years ago when we were both in the writing and composition at the University of Kentucky. And we've stayed in touch both as friends and also professionally over the years. Besides teaching college, she's also taught middle and high school. So she is an amazing teacher, and that's where I want to start this conversation today. So you have been teaching writing for 30 years. And why do you love teaching
Wow.
writing? Yeah, that's a long time.
Well, it's a long time. And when you put it that way, I guess one of the reasons is that because it's always new, I suppose there are, obviously there are similar issues that come up frequently or routinely, but every writing student has their own sort of repertoire of strengths and weaknesses. But I think more than the mechanics of it, what I really enjoy about teaching writing is many of the students that I've worked with over the years have very low confidence in their writing. I teach mostly freshman writing courses, although I do teach an advanced course in writing for social work majors, and they're very confessional. They're very deferential. They're very self-conscious and convinced that they're horrible writers. And so the kinds of approaches that I take are meant to build their confidence as much as anything. And that actually helps them become readers of each other's work, which is really important because, as I tell them, writing is meant to be read, and you're going to be writing for many other people than just your writing teacher. And so
true.
It's important to have readers. Yeah. But I think it's the confidence thing that, that's when they start to build their confidence, they start to make progress, and that's what I love about it. Literature teachers or math teachers, philosophy teachers will say, they love when the light bulb goes on, right? The aha moments. And I guess for me, it's when I see that their confidence is growing.
I agree with you. I feel the same way as a teacher, that growth mindset and aha, I get it. And really understanding that you're not there yet is something that is so inherently marvelous about teaching writing. What do you think are some of the things that you have learned that really help your students build their confidence as writers?
It takes some re-education in the beginning of a course, especially with my social workers, because I teach online. That course is taught online for all kinds of practical reasons, programmatic reasons, even when some of my students are otherwise in face-to-face courses. It's kind of a peculiar thing, but re-educating them to believe and, persuading them to believe that a writing class isn't all about their writing teacher correcting what they're doing wrong, but it's about their learning how to say what they mean for people who are interested in what they're interested in. And so everybody in a class has to play the role of an interested reader, but they also have to accept that they're writing to be read, and that they have to give each other that, honesty that, I kind of understand this, or could you come up with an example, or, should that be quoted, or things like that, so that because they're working in similar ways, and I'm holding each of them accountable for certain things, if I can, over time, persuade them to try to hold each other accountable, that builds their confidence too. They walk away feeling like they really learned something, and they can take it with them. That I told them that even my composition too, my research and writing students, I tell them that my goal is for them not to need someone like me by the end of the term. I want them to have some confidence that they can go about a research project, that they can make good decisions about the sources that they're using, and that they can work real hard on trying to say what they mean and support it and give readers a break with paragraph breaks and things like that. So it's that, and we've talked about this before, it's that threshold concept in a way of, because it's not something they come to a writing class with. Most of my students have come to my writing classes believing that I'm going to edit their papers. I'm going to tell them everything that's wrong and they're going to correct it. And that's really, correction is really one of the last things. Is I know you are a believer of that too. It's one of the last things you worry about. That's editing. What's most important is, what do you want to say? How much do you have to say? How much do your readers need to know in order to understand what you want to say? And things like that. So,
well, it's interesting because you mentioned that you have to re-educate people because they come to a writing class already hating it usually because it's been a bloody situation where the teacher put red ink everywhere. So, what?
And not always English teachers. Other teachers do that too.
Correct.
And so they feel like they don't know what they're doing, when in fact it could be that they've just been trying to write for a teacher rather than a reader. And they've been worried about the wrong things. They've been worried about correctness and maybe not used a particular word or phrase or not used a particular kind of syntactical structure or something because they're not sure it'll work and they're afraid of being wrong.
Which goes to the core of rhetoric, which is the art of persuasion and audience, purpose, and text. And what you're talking about here is audience and how important it is to think about the person to whom you are writing something. So what are some of the strategies that you use to help somebody really who's not used to that, who just think they're writing to their English professor and they don't really care about it? How do you help them reconceive the notion of they are actually writing something that is meant to be read by somebody and that they are capable of doing that?
It's kind of a fluid thing. One way is to act like a reader when I read their draft. Another way is just to ask them for drafts, right? I always have my students do a little bit of research first rather than to just think off the top of their heads about, what they want to say. I ask them to explore different topics and talk a little bit or, write a little bit about their thoughts about them, and they'll exchange online or face-to-face about their impressions of a particular topic that they've read about in the news, and they'll ask each other questions about it, and their job is to inform one another about the topic and what is of interest to them about it. I'll ask them to give me a sense of, what's important to them about the topic, why they think that fellow social work majors or, educated people would be interested in the topic that they want to research. And I'll just ask them, so what about this? And have you heard about that? And I'll send them additional articles to look at if I've run across them. And I just try to convince them that I'm not an expert on everything that they're bringing up. Right? I have I pay attention to the news. I pay attention to what's going on in the world. I have my own areas of interest. I have my own areas of expertise, but I certainly don't know more than they do about every possible thing they could write about. And I tell them to think about their persona, that, when they're writing, think about themselves as educating the reader. You're teaching your reader what you learned. You start out knowing very little about it. You learn a whole bunch on your own. Now teach those of us who are going to read your work in progress what you think we should know about it. And so again, that begins to sort of shift the burden, right? It begins to put the ball in their court, so to speak, put them in the driver's seat. There's another metaphor cliche for you.
Well, and it's particularly you're empowering them to realize that they're able to do that they've done the research,
and
that they've
right.
And that's rare, right? I mean, I think, as you said, it's a re-education because so often you just hand in a paper and somebody gives you corrections on it and there's no dialogue.
Let's face it, we read plenty of columns and news articles and news analysis that doesn't uncover every rock. No one can do that. And so I think at some point we have to grant our students they've thought enough about this from other people's perspective. Now it's time for them to go ahead and assert their own opinion. Again, explaining it, but I don't think they need to try to convince everyone in the world.
I think that's such an important point because there's so much available. And I think it's easy as a developing writer to think that you are not capable of writing something of the magnitude of a famous person or whatever, or even your teacher or somebody. And what you're suggesting...
Right, or even a not so famous person, right? Someone, who writes for Time or something, right? It's sort of half news, half feature story. And I tell my students, when they put something like a Time magazine article in their working bibliography, I'll say, you can use that to inform your thinking. It's a kind of a good first step. It's probably not a whole lot better in terms of depth and expertise, depth of knowledge. I talk to them about how journalists might be specialists and might not be at all. And, we talk about sort of the levels of expertise among writers of publications that they're reading. But I tell them, by the time you're done with your research, you could write that Time magazine article. And I just try to keep them thinking that we're going to work through the mechanics of it. What's most important is what is interesting. What do you want to say? What do you think is exciting or interesting about this topic that you would like other people to be interested in or excited about too?
And as you mentioned, there's just so many ways that you can write it. It could be a blog or a short post, or it just depends. And it's back to what we discussed in the beginning, audience and purpose.
Right. And one of the ways that I teach that in the social work writing course, I do it in the Comp 2 too, because they have each assignment has a very different audience. So that the first assignment is for them to really understand what makes the Social Work Today article. And there's some writer's guidelines on their website, which, can be helpful too. But it allows us to talk about a real audience, not the general public, which is, I don't even know what that means. But I remember a time when I thought there was such a thing,
But that's so good. And you can, you can do that across any field for people to get acquainted to the field. And it's interesting because you said in the beginning that two of your comp classes you've traditionally taught always on ground, and the social work class, because a lot of the social workers are practicing social workers.
Right.
So that has always been online. And of course, now that we've made a huge pivot to the online world, what did you do? You were teaching this online class for social workers before we all needed to because of the pandemic. What are some of the things that you had to do differently that you would have done if you were on ground that you do in the social work class online to enable the community of writers and the spirit that you create when you're on ground?
Well, strangely enough, I think one of the ways is just the way I begin every online course. I tell students they're creating a syllabus quiz, right? I say, okay, ask your questions, and then you're all going to answer them. What are you most concerned about? And they write back and forth, online in the discussion. Oh, it's really important that this is how late work is graded, or this is this is where you'll find all the deadlines, or this is what will happen if we need to change an assignment or something like that. And so they kind of go back and forth in their own discussion. And, if there's any question that they're at a loss to answer, I join in. But the second thing I do is a 6-word memoir thing. And there are lots of interesting online sort of visuals with captions, 6-word memoirs that are kind of funny. So I tell my students that that's what they have to do to introduce themselves to one another. They're going to, tell us all their preferred name, if it's not the name that, for their enrollment, and, what their particular, if they have a sense of where they want to go with their social work degree, or if they're in Comp 2, just what's your major and that sort of thing, and then compose your 6-word memoir. And I give them mine, only child, left home, found self.
And, that's a good one. You never shared that one with me before.
But they really, really like that, and it gets them bonding like immediately. I do it in all
That
of
is
my.
really a great opener
It
for a
really works.
course.
It works better than anything else I've done, and I'd have to think for a minute, to remember how I used to do it, but it works because it's creative and it's personal, right? So Gail, you similarly teach many courses online. How do they bond in your online courses? How do they sort of get to know what each other is up to and support each other along the way?
Well, as you mentioned, I teach in a digital entrepreneurship MBA program, and we actually teach the discussion part of our course is in Facebook. So that in itself already leads itself to a friendly
Right.
environment. And we do introductions with pictures in the beginning. And you also have the opportunity to do, instead of writing your response, you can do a video. So a lot of people do that,
Hi.
which is really personal, and people
Yeah.
respond. But the other thing that I do is before the class even starts, I have a little, I call it a short communication story. And it's about a time when I uh, actually published an article in the New York Times, an editorial. And
Mhm.
that, to a regular person, might have been a big deal, but I didn't have any self confidence. I didn't tell anybody anything about it. I didn't do anything with it. I
Wow.
didn't record. And tell them it's just a very short video, just a minute and a half. And I give that story and say, I wonder what I could have accomplished with my writing earlier had I had more confidence. And I just text it to everybody because I actually send an email out to the class with that little link and just say, text me back at this number so I can collect up their preferred phone numbers. Text me back something you relate to in this video. And I think by making
Yeah.
myself vulnerable from the day we start, just like you giving your 6-word memoir,
Right.
it sets the
Right.
tone. We're partners in this. We are on a learning journey
Yeah.
together, and that
Right.
really matters. And it's so different. So yeah, that's I think what it's a variation on the theme of opening up. As you mentioned, you said that one thing great about teaching writing is that every student is different, and so the techniques that you have to build and the way you have to work with different individuals changes all the time. So, can you maybe tell us a story? One of your favorite, I mean, there's so many in your arsenal, no doubt, with 30 years of experience. But what's a favorite story of one of those aha, now I get it moments from a student who
Yeah.
really understood, wow, I really can write writing that is meant to be read?
I'm going to go with it's a toss up, but I'm going to go with one of my favorite stories of a young man who has become a dear friend of mine, who, when he showed up in my Composition 1 class, he was part of a learning community, a leadership learning community, and boy, was he convinced he was a leader. And the difficulty in a class like that is that they're all leaders, right?
Right.
And that's a challenge right there. And they come super highly motivated and, very self-confident. So about a lot of things. He had a real hard time with my criticism of his writing. As he would meet me in my office and I would say, okay, so read this to me, or I would read it aloud and I would say, well, what does that mean? And he would say, well, it's right there, it says what it means.
Mm.
And finally I really didn't know what to do. Because I clearly wasn't convincing him, and I clearly didn't understand what he was saying, and I wanted to. And
Right.
so I said, do me a favor, have your roommate or, some good friend either read this to you and listen for where he or she stumbles, or read it aloud to that person and, ask for some feedback. And he came back, shortly thereafter and said, wow, you were absolutely right. I get it now. And he worked very hard after that. Really, it's one of those
Wonderful.
examples of writing as a writer and writing as a reader, right? He really learned that what was crystal clear to him in his draft was not so crystal clear to a reader who who couldn't have him sitting there saying, well, what that means is, if he was willing to. So that,
That's a
I
great
learned
example.
A lot through that
And
it really taught me a lot.
Yeah, and I think that reading your work out loud is such an important thing, and it's not taught.
Right.
It's not.
Right.
Part of the re-education is that, and I think over the years, that's one of the things that my students thank me the most for is giving them that one tool. So now you also are a scholar, and I love your scholarship, and I know that you're working on a
As
book.
are you.
Yes. And
I love your work.
So you're working on a book right now, and I know over the years you've done a lot of writing and thinking and scholarship around the teaching of writing, and you also have done rhetorical scholarship where you look to see what the rhetoricians are discussing.
Yeah.
So, what would you say is one of the things that you have liked about taking your work as a teacher and turning that into pedagogy, turning that into scholarship about the teaching of writing?
That's a good question. Because I really don't teach in my field very often. In spring, I taught a course in the history of rhetoric, which is my fear. It sounds deadly dull, and when I was an undergraduate, I would have thought it was deadly dull, and I just kind of discovered it as a graduate student. It's kind of ironic, actually, that I would end up in that part of the discipline. But I'm interested in how people use language to do things. And I think that's what informs that's the main thing that informs my pedagogy. And you were saying again, how do I convince students that they are writing to be read? Well, we look at a lot of different examples of, rhetorical performance in the world, not just writing, not just research, but we look at language use in contemporary politics, for example, which is a great way, if you ever want to really help students understand emotional and logical fallacies, pull from political commentators. You will see, the either-or fallacy. You will see hasty generalization, bandwagon, it's just kind of hilarious.
And it's so interesting that you said that your approach to rhetorical theory is how does language equate to doingness? And it seems to be perfect right now in a moment where we're in the moment of in a pandemic, economic demise, and a Black Lives Matters movement. And all of these have been speaking, writing, words on roads, but they have been rhetorical moments. And I think it's really important, as you said, to help our students realize that we are teaching them to write well so that they can do in their lives the things that they set out to do.
And as your list of the current crises that we're in the midst of reminds me that it's a visual rhetoric too that we take a look at. For example, the contrast between sort of a backdrop and what someone is saying, or a contrast between what someone is saying, someone is doing, and then, visual evidence of what that person is doing. So, and I guess my main interest is with the early ancient skeptics and the late 20th century, mid to late 20th century, rather skeptical thinkers for whom truth itself, I don't mean, it's a tricky thing to say, but truth itself is kind of negotiated. What we decide to believe. I even try to get my students in my research and writing classes to think about this too, that facts change. They think that when they start a research course, they think, okay, this is going to be easy. I'm just going to search for a bunch of information and throw it all into a paper and I'm done. And they're very eager to write that paper, which is the last thing they do in 15 weeks, right? The last 3 or 4 weeks of the semester is the paper. The rest is, what are you reading? What do you think about it? Has any one writer challenged other writers? And I tell them, when I was a little girl, Pluto was a planet. Then it wasn't. Now it is again. Orange juice was the breakfast drink. Well, not if you're diabetic, and I get them to think about how, facts are established knowledge, but even that can change. That's what research in science, in the sciences, social and human sciences and natural sciences do, that nothing is forever, that we're always growing our knowledge. And I think that's, I know I'm a little bit astray at the moment, but I think that's another way that I try to encourage them to believe that they've got something to say, because it isn't already all known. And their goal is not to go out to research and find a bunch of stuff that confirms what they already think, right? We talk about confirmation bias, but to genuinely learn something they don't know and try to convince somebody else that it's worth knowing.
Which is
knowing
a powerful act. That's a superb doing, really, right there.
Well, I think it's a rhetorical approach, right?
Yes,
that
it is.
Conversation and exchange of ideas is what makes, pardon another cliche, the world go round, right? I mean, that's how science works, and I show them how, yes, you'll be looking at scholarly articles, but notice that these scholars were referenced in this New York Times article or in that Newsweek article. And so what's up with that? Science does its thing, and then it trickles out into all these other publications, based on different readers' interests. And so that's sort of another lesson in audience too, right? That different kinds of readers need the same kind of information presented in different ways. So that's what I love about it, really. That's what I love about teaching writing, because I think it's about making students aware of the world around them and being interested in it and curious about it and wanting to know about it and wanting to have an opinion about it that they want to share.
Which is an enormously large content to cover in a quarter or semester. But I do agree with you. I mean, I think both of you and I feel honored to teach writing. And
absolutely, yeah.
So what would you say are 3 takeaways for students who are skeptics about having to take a writing class or learning to write better? What are 3 things that you would recommend to them that they should consider to actually become better writers?
Yeah. And of course, it's, changing beliefs is tough, right? That re-education is really tough. But I think the first thing is, the most important thing is just to accept that you're going to read each other's work in this class. Not the final version. You're going to be reading and sort of urging each other along with questions and comments and maybe even suggestions for what else to read if you've come across something. That writing is a social act, right? That your readers can help you, your imagined intended readers, because we're all in this research group together, can help you think about which direction to take and how much to explore and how deeply and that sort of thing. That's one. Just rely on your readers to inform your thinking too. Yeah. And another is, don't expect your instructor or someone else, a tutor, or your mother, it sometimes happens,
or your dog,
to correct it, right?
Or Sophie.
That's not what it's about. You can have the cleanest, most perfectly grammatical essay that is the dullest, most, And I mean, it's just not crucial. That's the polish that comes later. So don't worry when you're reading each other's or when you're drafting. You don't even have to have paragraphs at the beginning, as far as I'm concerned. You'll figure those out. So maybe my third one is kind of related to both. One of the things that is occurring to me a lot lately, and it's occurring to me too that it might be, and this may be too simplistic, but I wonder if it doesn't have something to do with how quickly we exchange ideas now, and in small pieces. And when you're asking students to write longer pieces, they don't always know where to break that paragraph, right? And like, what is a paragraph? Is it 8 sentences? Is it 5 sentences? Is it 100 words? Well, what a paragraph is a break for your reader, right? In my view, again, a kind of rhetorical. Like, there are some rules that you can apply. But when I read a draft that has, maybe there's a introductory paragraph on page 1, and at the bottom, paragraph 2 begins, and paragraph 3 doesn't start until page 3, I'll say, you know what? Take a look at that long paragraph and figure out where would be a good break for the reader to kind of package, block the information. And often what happens is they realize that they've got to rearrange sentences, that they've really got a lot of ideas going in there. It's really a coherence exercise, but it's in their court again, that they're the ones who are saying, okay, yeah, how many ideas do I have here? And where would it be helpful for me to shift so that the good ideas don't get buried in this long page-long paragraph? So I guess, for lack of a better word, I would say, be willing to believe that that writing isn't all about rules. That again, it's about readability and making your meaning understood.
Well, those are wonderful pointers, and certainly very, very helpful. And could you end with just some quick tip or hope or something for those of our colleagues who are having to transition from ground teaching to online teaching, writing teachers? Anything that you could say to them to give them some hope?
Well, I think one thing I would say is that you, teacher, do not need to read every single word your students write. And that, in fact, if you, I don't mean, I mean initially, when they're drafting, when they're exchanging ideas, I think that you need to be aware of all that, and you need to sort of guide them, but you don't have to micromanage every formative assignment, because they're all graphs. And what can really help you, what always helps me is I get to know my students by what, I'm sure as you do too, by what they're writing about. So if you give them enough sort of short assignments, ask them to, write an introduction, ask them to practice quoting in various ways or paraphrasing, ask them to respond thoughtfully with one question to each other's, early draft or whatever, that they're developing good writing and reading skills that are really going to make the difference for them. Because again, I think, grading for me is not all about correctness. It's about the act of writing and going from something to nothing. So, but again, I think, teachers have to believe that they don't have to grade everything super seriously.
That's a really important reminder.
Yeah,
because it's overwhelming. Can be overwhelming.
Sure, absolutely.
Well, it's been a wonderful talk, and thank you for the Writing with Sophie 3 top takeaways and all of your commitment and love to the teaching of writing over the years. And I hope you come back again.
Thank you, Gail.
Thank you. It's a wrap.
That's a wrap.